But also, do not worry. We hope that everybody will be candid. All of our panelists and all of our guests, we know that they will be. And we welcome your guys' feedback and comments. We won't have time for Q&A for all of our panels, but we will have certain panels where we're actually going to allow the audience to have an opportunity to submit a question to the panel. So you all should have received a little question card, and I will queue you guys all up as to when you can fill out that card, and we can do some Q&A that way. Well, I am excited to get this started, and we wanted to make sure that as we're going throughout the night, we're educating you on what's on the ballot, where do you go to vote. Everybody should also receive voting locations, and how do you fill out the dreadful absentee ballot, including the 2 signatures that are needed. So kicking us off with some of this educational knowledge is Kelly Cunningham. She's from the NAACP. She has been pushing people to get out, get registered to vote since actually last summer, and she's been heavy on it. So she has done a series of videos, and she's here with us tonight through video format to talk to us first and foremost about what's on the ballot. And so we could cue the video of Kelly and hear a little bit more about what's on the ballot, both the front and the back of the ballot. And again, please, she'll be referring to your ballot. So as you go through the evening, if you don't already have a sample ballot, you can, of course, raise your hands, and our wonderful voting ushers will give you one. And so we'll be starting that video very shortly.
Hi, I'm Kelly Cunningham with the Kentucky NAACP, and I just want to take a minute to let you know what's on this ballot for this upcoming election. So let's start at the top. Pull out your ballots. I know you all got one, and we want to make sure that you have the correct ballot. Your precinct's going to be in the top left-hand corner. All right, so straight party. You can vote straight party if you like. That means that every representative from that party that you choose will be selected on that ballot. That's it. You can also go and vote for each individual person. Presidential race. We got president, vice president. Big race. Trump, Biden. Kanye made it. He made it on the ballot. So select which one you want. 4-year terms. And then also we're going to our legislative branch. So we have elections on our ballot in Kentucky for our U.S. senators and for our state representatives in Congress. Now these are the people, you remember, that make the laws. They make the laws. They write the laws that we are to follow. State senators and state representatives for the state of Kentucky. We also have those races on our ballots. And these are broken up into districts according to where you live. They make the laws for our state. So that is the legislative branch for Kentucky. Now, commissioners, county commissioners, C and B, due to the merger of the state or for our local government and our county, those aren't really heavy in our urban areas, but they're still on the ballot because of the Constitution. Soil and water conservation, it is what it says, and you can research that a little bit later. Next, we're going to our nonpartisan judicial ballot. So we've got family court judge. It is what it is. We've got Lori Goodwin, Darren Neal, and Ellie Kerstetter. Those are 3 people that are running for judge on this particular election, okay? So family court, they deal with divorce, child custody, paternity. Those are some of the most important things, and a lot of us, might come in contact with one of those family court judges, and if not us, a family member. So we want to make sure we vote our values and vote our character. Flip the ballot. We have a bunch of stuff on the back of the ballot, okay? 2 constitutional amendments and a tax levy question for Jefferson County residents. Tax levy, basically, are you supporting or are you against Jefferson County Public Schools improving the facilities? However, they're going to take 7 cents off $100 of your property tax. So yes or no, for or against. Constitutional Amendment number 1. These are both on the back of the ballot, so flip the ballot. Number 1 is Marsy's Law. We saw it in 2018. We're seeing it again because the Kentucky Supreme Court overturned Marsy's Law that was in our constitutional amendment simply because it wasn't wordy enough. And then Constitutional Amendment 2 is basically asking for terms to be extended for Commonwealth's attorneys for 6 to 8 years, beginning in 2030. Also, it's increasing the time that a lawyer can from 2 years to 8 years that a lawyer can apply to be a district court judge. That's basically it. So for the amendments 1 and 2, yes or no? That's what it's asking us for. And I'll be back.
To your ballot, Kelly's going to be coming back to tell us more about it. But let's get this started. We have our panel. Our first panel is going to be talking about why you should even turn out to vote. Again, we talked about COVID-19. We talked about police brutality. We talked about all these things that, is just really disheartening the nation overall and even the city. But, how do you get the energy up to get out the vote? And what are we voting for? So I want to welcome to the stage our panelists. We have Representative Attica Scott that is joining us tonight. Thank you. Wonderful. We have Shelton McElroy who's joining us tonight. And as you all come up, please feel free. There's a little lever beneath your seat to adjust as you need. If you are a little one like I am, I'm all the way down here. And then we have Charlize Montgomery, who is here with us tonight as well. We welcome you to the stage. And we're so happy to have all of you guys. So just as, I know they don't need any introductions, but as just a brief point of introduction for our panelists, starting with Charlize. Charlize is the Community Engagement Manager for All Nations Assembly Church, and we're happy to have her here with us. Of course, Representative Attica Scott from the House of Representatives here in Kentucky. All right, Shelton's over here. You can tell Shelton's a fan, as we all are. Shelton McElroy from the Bail Project, Executive Director. We're happy to have you guys all with us tonight. Now, we only have a few minutes for each panel, a few 30 minutes, and so I want to launch right into questioning. Let's start with the ballot. Kelly just told us all the wonderful things that are on the ballot from a very technical point of view, a very unbiased point of view, as we expect Kelly to do, representing the NAACP. However, can someone break down the nuts and the bolts of it? And I'm going to start with maybe the toughest question first, the constitutional amendments. Shelton, can you first talk to us about the Bail Project and the work you do, and then maybe frame that in the context of the constitutional amendments, both which seem to deal in some part with the criminal justice system?
Thank you, Angela, and thank you, Representative. Thank you, Sister. I met you, but appreciate being on the panel with you. So my roles have changed. Actually, instead of being with the Bail Project, I'm now with the Louisville Community Bail Fund.
Awesome.
So that's a local organization. Both are doing similar work, right? And so what we're attempting to do is to bring justice to the justice system, right? And so we know that cash money bail puts African Americans, families, people of color, and low-income people at a disadvantage because it says essentially your freedom is now at ransom. You are supposed to be innocent until proven guilty. However, if you're held in captivity until you can put up more money, then that in itself would suggest that you are being punished. And so the goals of both the Bail Project and the Louisville Community Bail Fund, as well as groups such as the ACLU and a lot of folks at KFTC, Kentuckians for the Commonwealth, et cetera, groups are organizing to eradicate cash money bail in the state of Kentucky and throughout the nation. And so Marsy's Law is actually a revenge law. So that this law puts us in this place where if something happens, say someone happens to be poor, low income, unemployed, undereducated, and they shoplift from Walmart, Marsy's Law is this law that would suggest that Walmart could continually send a representative to push against a process of rehabilitation, right? Wow. So Marsy's Law would deter people from actually getting accused of something and being convicted, and then actually being able to realign themselves and walk into freedom. Marsy's Law would constantly push what would be termed victims to show up and advocate for longer penal sentences for persons that are incarcerated. And the complexity of that is business and an economic policy, because you have private institutions, you have unions of corrections officers that actually want to see those beds filled. They want jails and prisons filled. And so policies like these spring up out of their think tanks and land in our communities and are kind of Trojan horse. They're hidden secretively around what you might fear or what kind of emotions it could create if you happen to be victimized by a crime. Well, we're sitting in Kingdom Fellowship. We're sitting in church, and we believe in mercy. We believe in fairness. We believe in justice. We believe in forgiveness. We don't believe that people should be punished in perpetuity because they wronged me. And that's essentially what Marsy's Law wants to roll out constitutionally throughout the state.
Wow, thank you. And the crazy thing is, I mean, you get in the ballot, you know, in your hand and you start reading, it all seems very innocent. So I'm glad you cleared that up for us. Representative Scott, you, I know, have some thoughts not only on this, but of course, with recent things that you've been through where people said, you know, well, you know, there's some, Kamala's getting caught up in this way that they manipulated the law to essentially criminalize more people in ways that they shouldn't. So you want to talk a little bit about your recent experience where, unfortunately, you were falsely arrested for doing peaceful protesting, and maybe even tie that back to some more of the issues that we see on the ballot.
Definitely, and thank you, Shelton, for really breaking down Marsy's Law for folks. So my daughter's here somewhere, and we were arrested with our dear friend Shamika Parrish Wright with the Bail Project here in Louisville on Thursday, September 24th. That was the week that the Attorney General said there would be no justice for Breonna Taylor. So it was before curfew. We were following the marchers, and we decided we better break off. It's almost curfew. Let's get to the church. Well, this big black militarized vehicle blocked us off in the parking lot, and then the other side of the parking lot had a concrete block. We were at St. Francis. It's in District 41. I've been to the St. Francis School many times, so we were trapped in the parking lot, went ahead, parked, got out of the car, started walking to First Unitarian Church at 4th and York, and that's when the police stopped us. And they actually intentionally stopped us and harassed us because they first told us to turn around. We went to turn around, and then they yelled, circle them, and so they circled us up, told us to get on the ground, then pointed their guns and pepper ball guns in our faces and started arresting us. And then we didn't know until the next day, so you all knew before we did, that we've been charged with the felony attempting to burn down the library, which is in District 41. I'm one of the library's biggest fans. My son started a book club there when he was in elementary school. So you can only imagine how absurd I thought that was, that we would be charged with the Class D felony, spent 10 hours in jail. Brett Hankinson charged with the Class D felony, spent 32 minutes in jail. So we don't really have a justice system. We need to figure out another word for it. And so, you know, when I look at, when I think about Breonna Taylor's case and I look at these ballot amendments, Constitutional Amendment 2 would extend the term of service for Commonwealth's attorneys to 8 years. I don't want Tom Wine or anyone like him to serve for 8 years in office. That does not give us, the people, an opportunity to hold them accountable for nearly a decade. So I am a firm no on Constitutional Amendment 2, but it's also a very poorly worded amendment. It has 3 questions in it that you're supposed to respond to with 1 answer. Now, you might be okay with making sure that attorneys have 8 years of experience for their licensure. Yes, makes sense. But then they add district court judges and Commonwealth attorneys being able to extend their terms of service. Bad idea, don't want it. And so if that gets separated out in 2022, when we can have another ballot amendment, we can only do one every even numbered year in Kentucky, then maybe I would vote for the licensure issue for attorneys, but I would not vote to extend terms of service. I have to run every 2 years. Every 2 years, I'm running for office. Running right now, grateful to the people of District 41. You're sitting in District 41 right now for sending me back unopposed for the 2nd time in a row. I'm very grateful, but I wouldn't want to serve 8 years without y'all being able to hold me accountable. I'm gonna do something eventually where y'all like, she's got to go. And so I want y'all to be able to get me out of office. Marsy's Law Shelton broke it down. But the other thing I will say is it's a victim's rights law. We already have a victim's Bill of Rights. We don't need to put it into the Constitution of Kentucky. It's unnecessary, but somebody knew, the right state representative, the right senator, who could push it through for them and get it on the ballot for people to put into the Constitution, which would then make it very difficult for us to change if we ever wanted to do that in the future. And then for the tax levy question, I'm a huge advocate of our public schools, so I'm just gonna have to say I'm voting yes for the tax levy question, because I don't want our kids to keep going to schools that are falling down around them because they were built in 1950 and haven't been touched since then. And I want our kids to have all the resources that they deserve to have to be educated. So I'm a yes on the tax levy question. Other than that, I don't think there was anything else to add to the ballot, because I'm not gonna tell y'all, who I'm gonna vote for office. Except I'm going to vote for the right people, not the wrong ones.
And tonight, of course, we're not here to tell you guys how to vote. However, as you've heard from already 2 of our panelists, sometimes the wording of things sounds really good, but there's another side to the story. You just want to make sure you have both sides of the story, especially when we're talking about the Black community, especially when we're talking about the faith-based community. You want to make sure you're voting with your values and not against your values, irregardless of what the wording says or how the title is put. Charlize, I know that you are heavy and active in the community. I know that you've been pushing, trying to get people energized to vote. I think if people heard what was just said by Representative Scott and Shelton McElroy, they would probably feel a lot more passionate about getting out to the ballots. But how have you been working, especially in the context of All Nations Assembly, to really energize the community? And do you see in your touch points with the community that people are interested in voting this cycle? Are they somewhat apathetic, especially from the faith-based community?
Absolutely. So thank you to Shelton and Attica for speaking on that. What I've been doing at All Nations Worship Assembly is actually this year, we developed a landing page to encourage education to our people, to be able to look it up themselves if they have any questions about what's in the amendments, what's in the law, so they can do their own research. This past week, I was able to have an interview with Joe Marshall, who is the JCBS board for District 4, and we talked about the tax levy, and we talked about how we have 30 schools right now that could be shut down in Jefferson County, and how the money that they're asking for would help them tremendously for our schools to improve. So there should be a no question for us, particularly us Black people that are here, or people of color, to vote yes to that, because it's going to be our kids who are suffering, right? There shouldn't be a school here in Louisville that's over 30 years that's condemned on the 3rd floor. That's absolutely ridiculous. So definitely, that's been my part, is making sure that the faith-based, the church, sometimes in church I feel like we can be siloed a little bit as to what's going on outside in the world, is making sure that the church knows what's going on outside, and not just what's going on in your life and your kids who are in private school, because private school may not deal with what's going on in public, right? So I am advocating to make sure that All Nations, and not just All Nations, anybody that come in contact with, that they know what's out there, the resources that are available to everyone, and make sure that they're educated. Let's have the conversation. Let's get them the information they need to have.
Yeah. I'm going to kick it back to you, Representative Scott. I mean, one thing is to energize and empower people to get out and vote, but the other side of the power to your vote is actually running for office and really trying to make change from the inside. So can you talk about kind of what inspired you to run for office, and what advice you would give to individuals who are saying, look, I go to the polls and I vote, but I'm tired of voting for the lesser of 2 evils. I want a good option. Perhaps the option is, if you're in a position to get in the ballot yourself. So can you talk about that?
Definitely. I encourage folks to run for office. Down at Injustice Square Park, there's so many young people right now who are interested in running for office, and I'm wanting to support them. If they're interested in a political mentor, happy to be that for them, but also welcome them to Frankfort to see what it's like in the state capitol. I believe that we've got to have new and different voices serving at the local, state, and federal level. That's the only way we're really going to get some transformative change in our communities, both in our city, our Commonwealth, and across this country. And so when I talk to people, and I talk to a lot of moms especially, and women who are thinking about having families, about running for office, and I say to them, when I ran for school board, that was the first time I ever ran for office, I was working a full-time job, a part-time job, and was a single mom of 2 kids, and I still ran for office. So, you know, we can give a lot of reasons about why we won't run for office, but I would rather you look at all the reasons why you should run for office, because we need you. We need you serving in office. Is that Nicole? Nicole ran for school board too, and we needed Nicole on the school board. You're gonna run for something else though, we'll make sure of that. And then I got appointed to Louisville Metro Council and served there for 3.5 years. And it was really important to me for the opportunity to serve in local office, to really look at all the different issues that we have the chance to touch. And now at the state level, I've served for almost 4 years as the only Black woman there. And we have another sister who's joining us in January, but 2 of us out of 100 members of the House is not a representative democracy. So we need more Black women across Kentucky to step up and run for state office. We don't have any Black women in the state Senate, and we don't have any Black women who are constitutional officers. So please encourage your sisters all across Kentucky to run for office, because we are everywhere. We are in Appalachia and Eastern Kentucky, and we're in rural Western Kentucky, so we need to make sure that we're running. So if you want to see change in how policing happens, if you want to see change in education, you got to be in those seats to make it happen.
And I think, you know, when we think about voting, we never think about the fact that when we're on the ballot and we don't show up to vote, we don't get voted into office. And it's not just perhaps things on the ballot that we're like, well, I don't know, does that really matter to my life? By and large, we're coming from the Black community. They're on this by and large, because we know that didn't happen with Daniel Cameron. I'm not just gonna put that out there, okay? Very forward about that. But by and large, right, you at least have an opportunity to see if their values align with your values. And when we don't show up, we don't actually give those individuals an opportunity, because if we're not gonna vote for them, you know, it's very few people that are gonna vote for them because of the bias, because of the racism that we have here in America. Now, I'm not gonna skip over the presidential race. I know we have danced around everything on this ballot but the elephant in the room or the donkey in the room. So let's go ahead and talk about the presidential race. And I want to have a very candid conversation about this. Sheldon, I don't know if you're going to vote, who you're going to vote for or anything like that. But like I said this evening, I want to have a very honest conversation. We know that when it comes to criminal justice reform, many people feel like, you know, it hasn't been good on either side. But what do you say to people that are just like, well, I'm stumped, I just don't know what to do, should I just not go out and vote? You know, just from your personal perspective, working in the system, dealing with these laws, dealing with what may have happened under this current administration, knowing a little bit, of course, about Kamala Harris's background and things like that. Can you kind of offer just your perspective on that?
Thank you. I'd like to really think about Kentucky and what recently has happened via the second brochure, the son, the father, on his way out. One of his last executive orders was to restore the voting rights of over 200,000 Kentuckians that have been impacted by the criminal justice system and had a felony on their record. And the father, as he was on his way out, did an executive order restoring the right to vote for a large portion of those folks, but always having some exclusions. Those exclusions, those of us that are in the world of criminal justice reform, we're fighting to take away those exclusions. But the very first order of business that Governor Bevin did when he first came into office was to take away that executive order. And so 200,000 formerly impacted people got the right to vote, and the next day, through Governor Bevin, that right was taken away. So since then, the current brochure has given back that right to vote, still has those exclusions put in there. Those exclusions are detrimental to Black and brown communities. They're detrimental to humans. We're talking about one of the most fundamental principles of human capacity is the ability to vote for your elected officials. This is not a privilege. This is a fundamental right that is being taken away from people because of poverty, because of mental health, because of poor education and poor opportunities at employment. Communities are pushed and plundered into underground economies. The very same substance that's legal first time I voted was 6 years ago. I got to vote for the first time. And since then, I've not missed a time and a chance at the polls, okay? And we believe that every single of those 200,000 that are impacted by criminal justice policy that has prevented them from voting, once we get our voting rights back, we'll show up at the polls. And we'll elect officials that actually share similar values as us, as Attica, who will stand on the front lines and will vote and push for justice for Breonna and put her body and her daughter's body in the face of brutality and degradation by a system that is anti-black and brown people. And the only way we'll change that system is through voting. And so if you can disenfranchise thousands and thousands and thousands of us, then you can prevent us from changing that system and electing people that look like us and have similar values as us.
Come on now. Wondering when you're gonna run for office, Shelton. So let's dig a little bit deeper in this too. Charlize, of course, you go to, I guess a term that people use, I know some people don't like this term, multicultural church. And we just heard Shelton give a very passionate, factual account of what's going on in your church, or even in churches that, I know your church is very heavy in social justice and really thinking about that, but not even just your church, but other multicultural churches. As you've been out in the community, of course, serving as a community engagement lead, are you seeing a divide in what the black side of that church versus the white side of that church is thinking in terms of political leanings or even issues that they're considering? Do you see that?
To answer the question directly, yes. You cannot not be honest. There is a divide. I think it's also important with this conversation that you define, what multicultural is.
Yeah.
Because I feel like a lot of our churches are more multiracial, diverse in its races.
Yeah.
Culture, black culture, Native American culture, things that we do every day. Or let's talk about it, white supremacy culture. So, it on those guidelines. Yes, there is a divide. To kind of speak more into that, I think that for my church, and I add to talk about that, I think it's dependent upon the leadership, where the leadership is and where they are and how they think, what happens within their body. And it's going to be some very difficult conversations, right? You're talking about years of cultural differences when it comes to race, people, and believers. So you have to be willing to have those hard, difficult conversations with people that are part of your membership, or maybe not a part of your membership, people who may be looking at you from outside that want to come in. So to answer your question directly, yes, there is a political divide. I don't think that we see churches who define themselves as multicultural, multiracial, having that conversation like I would like to see.
And along those lines, I mean, if I were to look at Marsy's Law and be, let's say, maybe out in the east end of Louisville, I might say, well, dang, I might be a victim one day, and I might think of it. However, if I'm in other parts of Louisville, I might be thinking about how I've been victimized falsely and how this does not identify with me. Are there things that we could be doing in the community, maybe even in the church, to help the other side of the aisle, sort of say, literally, understand a perspective that is not their own when they're looking at these sort of pieces of legislation and when they're considering what circle they're going to fill in on the ballot?
Sure. So panels like this, having these conversations more, having town halls more, and not just with pastors but with members too. I think it's important sometimes if you get members caught on, they'll finally catch on what this member's caught on. Maybe I finally take a look at what they're trying to say. I hate to use that terminology, but people are driven by what their friends and what their colleagues think. And so having those conversations and still, providing the education, providing things like this, an opportunity for it to happen, and not just become so siloed when we do these things, and not open to all perspectives as well, whether they be good or bad, and having crucial conversations, as well as having emotional intelligence to have those.
Wonderful. Well, we are out of time for this panel. I want to thank you guys so much for joining us. We're going to be moving on to our next panel as these wonderful panelists come down off of the stage. The next panel is going to be Young, Gifted, and Voting. As those panelists are getting mic'd up, I wanted to take a moment for us just to kind of process what we've heard here and also to give you guys an opportunity. This next panel, we're going to be hearing from young voters or perhaps those that haven't decided yet whether they want to vote. Again, we didn't ask anybody prior to having them be a panelist what their political leaning was, whether they're going to vote or not vote. We just wanted to have an honest, candid conversation around that. But as we're talking to these voters and getting their perspective, perhaps you're a young voter in the audience yourself. Perhaps you are interested perhaps in what young voters are thinking. You may even have children, relatives that are young, and have some questions to pose. So now is actually a really good time as we get them mic'd. Does everyone get one of those little square question cards that they may? So if you have a question that you would like to ask for this panel that is coming up, could be any question you know, that you have to come to mind for these younger activists, then please do take a moment now to think about that question, and we'll have an opportunity to answer those questions as they're coming up. The other thing I would like for us to do as they're getting mic'd up is to kind of, again, familiarize yourself with the ballot. Show of hands, who here has already voted? I know it's pretty early, so. Okay, cool, so we have a good number of people that have already voted. If you haven't, that's great. In fact, that's what we wanted to do this panel early enough in the voting season. Again, voting ends on November 3rd. That's not when it starts. And so we want to do this early enough in the season so that we could get the information out to people and they could go to the polls feeling comfortable, feeling like they know what's on the ballot, and also knowing what leans towards their personal you know, cares and concerns in their community. The other thing I wanted to talk about is the voting locations. Does everybody have a sheet that has the voting locations on it? Everybody have it? And if you don't, you can raise your hands and our voting ushers will bring one of those sheets up for you. And one thing to note with the voting locations this year, there are several what they're calling super centers. So the KFC Yum Center is one of those. The Kentucky African American Heritage Center is another one of those super centers. You do not have to go into, traditionally when we do voting season, right, you look and you say, well, where's my voting location? It's usually somewhere in your neighborhood and you go there and you go only there to vote. Well, this year you can vote anywhere, and any of the locations you can vote at, and the super centers are really great because they're large locations, especially in this time of COVID. If you go early to vote, Louisville is not experiencing what a lot of the other cities are experiencing. They're doing early voting, which is a good thing too to be experiencing, which is long lines, because that means people are getting out and voting. But right now, I visited the poll myself, very small lines. And as you hear, not in the video, we're not gonna play it now, but we're playing a little bit later on tonight about absentee ballot voting. There are drop boxes that you can turn in your absentee ballot. By show of hands, who here requested an absentee ballot? So we have a few people. Who here requested a ballot and has not yet received it? Okay, so one person. Okay, and you might have family members or friends that this has happened to. One thing to note is that you must wait until October 28th. If you requested an absentee ballot and you have not yet received it, you must wait till October 28th to go in and vote without using that absentee ballot. So in other words, some people are so energized and just ready to go vote that they you know, apply for an absentee ballot, you know, and they're waiting for it to come. They said, well, it hasn't come yet. My best friend called me, hey, you got your absentee ballot? I said, no, and then she said, well, it hasn't come yet. And we can bring the panelists up once they're mic'd and they can kind of start coming onto stage, Chantel. But, you know, they're so excited to go out and vote, and they're like, well, I'm just gonna go to the polls and vote anyway. Do not do that. Your vote will be thrown in the trash can if you do that. If you apply for an absentee ballot, even if it's taking forever and tomorrow to get to you, you cannot come into the poll and vote with the regular voting process until October 28th. You have to give them time for it to arrive. So that's just something that a lot of people are unfamiliar with, and in their excitement are going out to vote and missing that opportunity to have their vote counted. And of course, we'll show a video to talk about the signature issue. Well, here we go. We have our young activists with us. I'm so happy to have right with me Ashanti Scott. Last name might sound familiar to you, but she is a powerhouse to her own rights. So I will not brand you with your mother's name. Ashanti is her own. We have with us Elijah Thomas. Elijah Thomas is with the Youth Violence and Prevention Center, the U of L. And then we have Jerron Thomas. There is no relation, I believe, that I'm aware of between the two of you, but maybe you might be cousins somehow down the line. And Jerron is here with us. He's actually an aide on Metro Council. And so I'm excited to have you guys here. And again, if you guys, these chairs can spin a little bit, so sometimes lowering them helps a little bit if you want to. But tonight, I really am excited to talk to you guys and just hear your perspective, your opinion on what's going on in the world today. Are you energized about voting? Is it something that you're passionate about? You know, before we even get too far into that though, I know, Ashanti, that you have been very passionate about gun laws and have done a lot of work in that area. Do you want to talk about some of your passion areas? You're also a political science major at University of Louisville. Do you want to talk about that and your engagement in the political system? And also, we also know that recently you were as well falsely arrested and charged with trumped up charges in relation to peaceful protesting. So please share that story.
Yeah, definitely. I am a political science student at the University of Louisville. I definitely think that there's a lot of things that are my passion. Justice for Breonna Taylor is definitely the top of my list right now. I also think that addressing gun violence in my community is very important to me, as well as addressing economic injustices. The wealth gap between the Black and white community is very large and it's awful. Also addressing housing, food, shelter, all of those above are really my biggest passions right now.
Elijah, Shanti listed off a lot of things that were her biggest passions. I know there's some overlap there, of course, with youth violence prevention. Do you want to talk about your work there in the center and also your passions as well right now? Is your, check to make sure your mic pack is on.
You should be.
Okay, well, can everyone hear him? I think you're okay.
Well, the Youth Violence Prevention Research Center, what we're trying to do is essentially create a social movement campaign to change perceptions about violence in the West End, just getting down to the root cause, which John mentioned, you know, as far as housing discrimination, limited food deserts, et cetera. You know, we want to run the backhoe and uproot, like really facilitate, you know, the atrocities that we see, particularly within the Black community. And when it comes to my passions, I figure that, you know, everything starts with the mind, right? So every single action that we take starts off as a single thought. So for me, my passion is more so getting to the dimension of, you know, our struggles as Black people. You know what I mean? Like, I want to address like trauma that occurred from, you know, transatlantic slave trade way back. You know what I'm saying? Like, I want to get into all of that, start alleviate some of these mental curses, you know, it's about our communities, you know, so we can start building stronger families, you know, start, you know, really become self-reliant. Like, my whole tip, I'm thermal self-reliant, so my goal is just, my passion is just Black people.
Awesome. Jerron, does any of that resonate with you? I know that you're yourself starting to get active in the political scene.
Since high school. And within lately, I've been added to I'm an ambassador for the 3rd District of Louisville Metro Government that attached many of the West End. To Shabbat.
So, Ashanti, of course, your mother is in elected office, you're a political science major, you're wearing a face mask that says vote. I might say it has love on the other side of it. So, I am assuming you are very passionate about voting.
Yeah, I definitely am very passionate about voting and getting the youth to vote, and then also looking for candidates that fit what I'm looking for, what my vision is. Especially seeing the Breonna Taylor case in Louisville, we see the mayor did a terrible job. We see even the Metro Council, they haven't been transparent. They're not being held accountable. So I think that I'm really passionate about voting, but also about getting the candidates that we need.
Yeah, that's awesome. Elijah, are you voting this election cycle? Are you passionate about voting? Are you feeling somewhat apathetic about voting? What's your feeling?
I'll say that I did vote. I voted today, actually.
Awesome.
And on the real, looking at that whole ballot kind of made me depressed. Because I was just thinking, like, you know, a lot of us, I can't speak for everybody else, I can speak for me. Only reason I'm voting for Joe Biden, the only reason I'm voting for Amy McGrath is because I don't like Trump. You know what I'm saying? Like, other people, for example, like the rich, the 1%ers,
Elijah, you want to hold the mic up to your mouth a little?
like the 1%ers, oh, there we go. Like the 1%ers, for example, they voting for Trump because he promised them tax cuts. So they got something that they're trying to preserve or something they're trying to defend. They have an agenda that they're trying to push and that they want to see. And they're voting for the politician that has their values and interests. People are voting for Mitch McConnell, like working class white folks, because they want to see jobs coming back to America and et cetera, et cetera. Black folks, we ain't got none of our issues that's on the agenda. I ain't heard Biden or Kamala Harris say anything about preserving, like, about police brutality, like protecting us from the police, about these food deserts, about getting our fathers out of prison, about miseducation within the school system, teaching black history. I ain't heard everything. Yeah. So on the real, I'm not really too passionate about it, but I'll tell you what would make me passionate about it. Yeah. If black folks started weaponizing their vote the way white women weaponize their tears, I'd feel that. You know what I mean? I'd be all for it. Because right now, what I'm seeing is we just voting on like personality and everything else. We're not voting like this is war. We as black folks, we're at war. I'm just gonna keep it real with you. This country is built off warfare. You know what I mean? So we gotta vote like we're at war. So what I would like to see is one, like we got a plethora of organizations out here. Money dictates politics. These people like endorse the politicians they want to see to get their agendas pushed. If black folks start doing it like at these churches, like we have a bucket that we pass around for offering and everything else, if we start doing that like with agendas that we want to see pushed to endorse certain politicians, get people in position to act our spokesperson like Attica Scott, we need more of her, you know what I mean? Like if we started moving like by the rules of war, then I'd be into it. I ain't seeing that right now. I'm just seeing us vote for the sake of voting so we get a little sticker or whatever. Our agendas aren't getting pushed because we're not pushing them. We're not putting money behind the politics. We're not lobbying. We're not doing none of that. We got to start doing it like it's war. This is war. So when we start moving by the rules of war, maybe I'll be a little more interested. But until then, yeah, you feel me?
Jerron, I know you have a response to that, especially as you're getting engaged yourself on the inside.
Nah, Elijah has always been long-witted and always on point. So, but he touched very great points, and one of the points that he touched was lobbying. African Americans have no lobbying group. Well, first of all, African Americans have no financial stability in this country, if we want to talk about the root causes. So through some of the opportunities I've had through college, I've been able to go to different conferences and be exposed to different things. And one of the conferences that I've been to is called APEC, American Israel Policy Affairs Conference. There hasn't been a single presidential candidate that hasn't came through there. Bernie Sanders and maybe Trump. That's because they didn't ask for their money. Why do everyone who goes to their conference ask for their money? Who's at that conference? American Israel Policy. So not to attack different religious groups or whoever may be, but we're not at that table. I was looked at as the very few, the only few, but it was a learning experience. It was a motivation. Maybe the NCAA can look like this. NCAACP, I'm sorry. But regardless to say, the money that was in that room isn't in this room. So we don't have the political stance that other different groups have. So that's the first thing. When you look at YouTube, you have a recommended. The people that we're voted for are already recommended by these people. We don't get to put who's on the ballot. That's where we mess up. We're not creating a group and saying this is what we need, and any person who wants our vote can't get it unless we all get it. We don't have that. We don't have a group who puts us all together and says this is what we want, this is what we need, this is how you get our vote. And that's the biggest issue I see in our community.
I'm probably going to bring this up again in another panel, but I think your comment right there, Deron, made me think of the news that dropped today where we know that Ice Cube is now supporting Trump. I'm sorry if you're just hearing that now. Have a moment of silence. Yes. Yes. So being youth, being younger voters, I know Ice Cube is way before your guys' time, but certainly I think he's transcended generations. One of the things, his reasoning actually, was that he felt that, he could negotiate with Trump for this contract for black people around wealth. My question is, I think, most of you guys on this panel are in some way seem to be thinking about working from the inside. What are your thoughts on that? I mean, do you guys, I know you have a response, Ron.
Yeah, before I respond, Republicans and Democrats was at that conference. So we got to stop looking at it as if it's one side or another. It's us versus what we need. And it's not, Republicans and Democrats have done detrimental things to our community. So let's cut that talk. Just before we start that conversation, that's my view on that. I don't want to have the conversation of what side are you on, it's what side are we on.
Yeah, absolutely. And Elijah, of course, you had a very rough response to that news about Ice
Part
Cube.
of it is because, I bump Ice Cube. You know what I mean? Like, America's Most Wanted, Death Certificate, Lethal Injection, The Predator, all those pro-black albums that he used to put out. Like, I'm trying to figure out.
Do you think that could have been a business move?
It was a business move. Because he was the same dude at NWA, and he also endorsed the St. Ides, but you also claiming to be a Muslim on the same tip. So.
And we're living in can you blame him for living in a capitalistic society?
You gotta make capital, but when you compromise and sell out your culture, you know what I mean? It really shows me what type of man you are.
So I'm gonna interject a little bit here because I like what you said, compromising and sacrificing your culture. Ashanti, I know that values, you have some very strong values, very great core values, and you're doing political science. Have you ever thought about this kind of compromise in the political world between your values and what shifts the needles and maybe almost in the church we call it like your worldly needs and your spiritual needs? Have you thought about that, kind of having, working your way to get your degree in this area, of course having a mother that's an elected official, maybe yourself, maybe one day wanting to run?
Well, I think, first of all, Donald Trump is a white supremacist, and his base is white supremacist. So any black person who thinks he's going to negotiate anything positive for the black community is naive at best and kind of dumb. It's not gonna happen. So I think that what Ice Cube is doing is not smart. And I also think that trying to weave into Republican spaces or upper Democrat spaces and thinking they're going to rub your elbow is not the way to go through. I think it's important that you get, more representatives like Representative Scott, who is from the community. She's from West Louisville, lives in West Louisville, so she knows our demands, and she's gonna go advocate for our demands. You're not gonna get somebody who's not in our community, who's not from the black community, whose base is white supremacist, and think they're gonna sit and give you a seat at the table. That's not gonna happen, so.
Basis that a contract is only as good as the relationship you have with the person you're making it with. And a liar will sign anything. So we have to think about that continuously, and I think that's what the point that you're getting at, that if you don't, Donald Trump or anybody like him or anybody, you know, if you don't have, how can you have a relationship with the white supremacists whereby they would honor a contract to benefit black people financially when that's actually counter to what their whole entire agenda is? So I think that's a really good point you raised. So we have time for just maybe one last question. And the question I wanted to ask is maybe more so around this concept of pop culture and people really trying to appeal to your guys' generation. In my generation, I'm the kind of the tail end of the millennial generation, and I know generations before, there was always this thought that if you shove enough celebrities, you know, down our throats, that we'll vote for anything, we'll agree with anything. And unfortunately, I hate to say it, that I think a lot of the former generations really did do that. Does your guys' generation do that? And Shanti, I'm gonna start with you and then work my way down. But is your guys' generation the generation of put a celebrity in front of it and we'll eat it up? Or do you guys see any value in celebrities? Do you think about their endorsements or non-endorsements of things?
I definitely think that the youth I talk to are amplified by the celebrity appearance. I know like Cardi B has had meetings with Joe Biden and even Bernie Sanders, as well as I believe Megan Thee Stallion. So I think that that definitely puts voting at a forefront for them, and it gives them a break from the music to see the importance of voting. So I think that's important. And so I think our youth definitely do look to celebrities for kind of like that influence.
Elijah?
Yeah, the majority, I'd say. I don't, I see celebrities just as mere distractions from the real issues that are taking place, so I try not to indulge in any of that. Most of it's fabricated. They're just doing whatever it takes to make money, like you were talking about with capitalism, like making capital in a capitalistic society. So I do think that the majority are feeding in and falling for the okie doke, but I don't really get into that. I really wish they pushed some more, like, I don't want to say it, but now I'm gonna say it. I really wish that they would just, you know, kind of instill more like values and morals into us instead of telling us like, you know, just vote and all that. Like I want our community had morals before we could eat and vote. You know what I'm saying? Like there were a plethora of self-run black communities that existed, you know what I'm saying? Like not even just Black Wall Street. Like I just wish they would instill more, you know, positive like representation of blackness, positive morals when it comes to family, et cetera, instead of just, you know, like the whole vote. That's still feeding into the system at the end of the day, you know? So, yeah.
It's tap dancer routines, more substance. Jerron, what about you?
I guess from the aspect that I have, looking at some of the people who own these companies, the major industries, the CNNs, the MBSCs, the companies who are putting this information out, this media who makes these celebrities, you know, not the actual celebrity, but who is behind that person. That's what I look at, so I don't follow too much on the big names. And I look at celebrities as any popular person that is of color, not just within media. In TV, I look at it in politics, as anything that's on television.
Awesome. Okay, guys, well, thank you so much for being up here and sharing your wisdom. Thank you. Wonderful. So as we are transitioning to the next panel, Kelly is going to come back and talk to us about the absentee ballot, which I know people in this room have requested an absentee ballot and are going to be filling that out. And we want to make sure that you're filling it out appropriately. So we're going to cue a video from Kelly Cunningham from the NAACP as she walks you through that ballot.
Hey, it's Kelly again, I'm back. So we're talking about the absentee ballot. The deadline is already passed in Kentucky to request it. So if you have requested it, you can always check the status. Some people say, oh, I requested it in August. I don't have it yet. All right, so this is what you do. Go to govoteky.com and the second little bar down says check absentee ballot status or check your voter registration status. You can go there, see when the county clerk's office has sent it to you, and you also can see when you requested it. You can see when they received it after you have returned it, okay? So with the absentee ballot, there's a packet of information that you're gonna get in the mail. You get the ballot, you get an inner envelope, an outer envelope, instructions. If you're in Jefferson County, you get a little slip of paper that explains in specific details the tax levy question for or against, yes or no, how to vote there. You want to make sure first that you complete the absentee ballot. You can use a pencil or you can use a pen. You want to make sure you completely fill in that circle. The instructions tell you what to do if you make a mistake. If you make a mistake, erase it clear, or if you make a mistake with the pen, you need to circle the correct choice. Also, with the absentee ballot, it has to be returned postmarked by Election Day, November the 3rd, if you're going to mail it. If you're not going to mail it, make sure you complete it and then take it to one of our early voting sites or the Election Center at 701 West Ormsby. Also, with the absentee ballot, you want to make sure you complete it in its entirety. Follow the instructions, complete the ballot, fill in all the circles, front and back, fold that up, put it in the orange envelope or the envelope that looks like a manila folder, put it in there, sign in the middle where it has the X and it's underlined, and the county clerk's office in Jefferson County, they actually highlighted that for us. You don't need a witness if you didn't get any help completing the ballot. Take that ballot, put it inside the orange envelope, seal it, do not tear off the flap. That disqualifies your ballot. Take that sealed orange envelope and put it in the white envelope. That's the outer envelope. Sign the top left-hand corner. That will validate your signature. So you could look for 2 signatures and 2 sealed envelopes. Put that back in the envelope. Put it in the mailbox or put it in the ballot box at the early voting sites or at the Election Center. I'll be back.
Able to be that community connector, to try to connect as many resources as possible, along with connecting with other organizations from other cities and states that have came down here to help assist with us with this protest. Right now, advocating getting the protests to the polls. So bringing our protests to power is really what I'm advocating for right now. So those people who have been on the front line, it's like, okay, now we can come together to vote people in or educate ourselves on how do we be on the ballot next. And that's basically what I'm trying to do is, you know, because being on the front line, you see so many young people. Just like Attica said before, like, these are our future leaders. So we have to be, and now look, now we are leaders, you know. At first we had, you know, leaders that have came across Louisville that have paved the way for us. And so I think it's now time, and we are doing that, is to be that leader in our community and also help educate our youth on how to be leaders in the community. So right now I'm working with the Urban League to get out and encourage. We did voter registration. We showing up in neighborhoods. We pulling up in different neighborhoods that normally probably wouldn't get the attention to encourage people to get out and vote. So through the East End, West End, Newburgh areas, we're pulling up and we're actually doing a caravan. So we've been doing a caravan in different neighborhoods just to get out and talk to people one-on-one like, hey, you voting today? And if you ain't voting, why ain't you voting? Let's talk about it.
Trinidad, I'm going to ask you kind of a follow-up question to that. I know that you have not only been active here in Louisville in terms of the work you've done with youth violence prevention, but you actually have traveled nationally doing some dialoguing with activists going all the way back to the Ferguson protests. So can you talk about that and talk about whether you're seeing those communities as engaged with the political system, or if you're seeing people kind of arising out of those communities and running for office themselves?
Say her name!
Breonna Taylor!
Say her name! Thank you for that question. So for the past 6 years, I've been at the outset of approximately 90% of my speaking engagements, my presentations, doing a call and response for Mike Brown. I'm from St. Louis. That was my neighborhood. I was engaged in the streets on the front lines as a disruptor as well as a researcher. And so when I yell, people are like, why is he yelling? Why is he saying Mike Brown? It happened so many years ago, you know, and what Elijah just stated, we have to understand that we are literally at war with white supremacy, and beyond white supremacy, supremacy, right? Before white supremacy, there was tribalism in Africa and a number of other, you know, spaces around this globe. So we're really at war with oppression, with supremacy, etc. And so for us to engage in this work and to create the synergy that this church and so many other spaces around the city have created, we have to keep ourselves grounded in the catalyst that brought us to this space, which is, for us in Louisville, what personalized it was Breonna Taylor. And so you ask about, you know, how certain atrocities facilitate political engagement from community members. And so on the ground, we all saw in Ferguson, right, we saw buildings being leveled, we saw a National Guard, we saw a number of other law enforcement, and we saw narratives, dominant narratives that were being created by popular media, right, which said, look at all these damn black people. They don't care about their communities. They're tearing it up. What are they doing? They're destroying the tax base. And that's a really complex, that's a complex perspective. But one of the things that, of course, wasn't being projected from a narrative standpoint is that there was actually a lot of organizing going on. There was a lot of community building, social cohesion, some of the same things that we're seeing that are occurring now in Louisville. Those same things occurred in St. Louis, but they weren't projected popularly. Additionally, a lot of the key activists in the streets, from a political perspective, they identified we're really at war with white supremacy and with political power. So what we will do, you know, the city was saying, yo, okay, well, we're gonna get rid of the police chief. They said, nah, we want the person over public safety removed, and then we're gonna work our way down. Went to council meetings being very disruptive. So in every space that they could engage and disrupt and own their power and rehumanize themselves, that's what was facilitated. When I came back from Ferguson in 2000, I was there November, December, January 2014. When I came back, Anthony Smith, who was the former director of the Office for Safe and Healthy Neighborhoods, said, yo, Trinidad, what did you do? How can we use what you brought back to Louisville to prevent Louisville from becoming the next Ferguson? In 2020, what are we, right? We engaged a number of community members across a number of sectors, a lot of qualitative research to counter the popular narrative that the numbers say.
The numbers say all we want to do as black people is kill one another. We don't want jobs, we're unemployed. We're in poverty and we like it, right? So we engage community members, created their own narratives about their lived experience, and what did that data say? It said, Black lives and Black history matter. It said, the city doesn't care about West Louisville or Black lives. It said, racism and oppression is so rampant in our community that it facilitates hopelessness and helplessness, yet the data also stated that we must do something. So that says, as black people living through 400 plus years of everything that you all have heard from Shelton, from Representative Scott, and a number of other speakers, we still identify the accountability that we have to determine what our spaces look like, what our humanization looks like, in the context of oppression, right? And so think about that. Think about what all we have to do and what all we are still facing.
And I think that's a good segue, Katora, because one thing I heard him mention is this concept that trying to rehumanize ourselves and then looking at it also from a legislative context. And how do we not become the next Ferguson? Well, here we are the next Ferguson. But you are actually, right now, have done some really phenomenal work around legislation locally here. You've been working with the ACLU. Can you talk a little bit about what you've been doing and how you're really trying to prevent this from happening again, what happened with Breonna Taylor?
Yeah, I think one of the first things that I want to hit on that Trinidad did is that I left Louisville for 10 years and I came back in 2016. And when I came back, I started really trying to figure out where my space and place was in the community. And I think maybe 3 or 4 months after being here, I had said to several people, if we don't do something, we're going to become the next Ferguson. Like, I felt it, I saw it within the way our elected officials moved, I saw it within the community. And so I think that when we ask, what can we do to prevent another Breonna Taylor from occurring here in Louisville, I mean, the only thing that we can do is abolish the system of policing, right? And so I am an abolitionist. I don't believe that we should be doing mass incarceration and doing those type of things. And so what we have to do as a community is, a lot of folks say defund the police. Because I am in political spaces, I say divest and invest. And so we have to identify where we are overspending to over-police our communities, and then take that away and put that into resources that many people spoke about, the young folks spoke about it, and really it's just the basic needs of black folks. And so until this city recognizes that they have to invest in the basic needs of black people, then we're going to continue to be at war. When you think about it, when we're hungry, we're mad and aggravated. Like I'm hungry right now and I'm a little tired, right? And so, but when you talk about a population of people who live in, for the West End, of food apartheid, like you're gonna have constant conflict, It doesn't matter, what you do, but if you walk into a store and somebody bumps you, I might get pissed off because I'm hungry and I don't have my basic needs being met. And so I just wanted to lift that up. But as far as policy goes, with everything that happened with Breonna Taylor, for me as a black woman, I just didn't know what to do. Like that was the only thing that I knew that I could do due to the access to resources and the privilege that I have with working at ACLU. And so obviously that is one of the things that we're going to continue to push for. Representative Scott has pre-filed that to push at the state level. But I think that when I look at it, it's passing Breonna's law at the state level is really a crumb of this bigger pie. And so until we, on the state level and the federal level, implement those things that hold police accountable, so dealing with qualified immunity and saying that police don't have all these extra protections, then all the other things that we put into place, I'm not going to say it's for naught, but it makes it a little bit more difficult, because then what happens if someone does do that? Where is the accountability being held? And so also when we look at the FOP contracts, locally the FOP contracts, and I give I think it's phenomenal what we have been able to see within the community, that people are paying attention. And so the Metro Council and the mayor's office thought that they were going to be able to squeeze something in, and it's because that people are activated. People said, no, we're not going to do this. And so Metro Council, it didn't move. I mean, obviously that's just the first small step, and there's more work to do, but yeah, there's so much legislatively.
I want to actually continue down this path and follow up. I mean, you know, the current administration, you know, President Trump, I wish I could call it a dog whistle, law and order, but it's literally screaming from the mountaintops. It's not even a dog whistle anymore. Can you talk a little bit more about how that mentality, how the policies around, you know, that dog whistle, law and order, really are counterproductive to what you were mentioning in terms of law enforcement reform?
Yeah, I mean, a narrative shapes policy. You know, Trinidad just talked about it, and we've seen it here in Kentucky and across the nation when you look at the war on drugs. You know, black folks in the 80s and 90s, our women were called, you know, different terms, and now it's an opioid epidemic. And so you've seen the likes of Trump or Mitch McConnell coming in to Kentucky and pouring all this money in around election time to Eastern Kentucky poor white communities to say we're going to put this and to help the communities, but still the black community is continuous to be left out of it. And then it was just this week in Mount Sterling, Kentucky, which is a very small community, there was an article, and please look it up, but there was a police officer who traded a military weapon. I think it was like an M14 or some type of military weapon because he owed a debt to somebody in the community. And so as I was looking at it and was like, what is this? They have a federal a program that allows communities to loan and get weapons, militarized weapons, and that is happening not only here in the state but across the nation. So from the federal level, the federal government is militarizing our communities. And so when we talk about the fight is huge. And one thing that my brother Trinidad again has taught me is that constantly, no matter who is elected, you know, for us, the community members, we're constantly organizing towards and organizing against, right? And so we have to reimagine what community and society looks like, and we're literally pushing towards something that none of us has ever seen before.
Nicole, on the context of that, you know, kind of reimagining how we think of things, is your vibe kind of in the streets in terms of people that have been engaging in the protests? Are they really calling for that? I mean, I know I'm seeing that, but you know, are you seeing that as well, that people really are starting to kind of think outside the box about what society should be like? People, as we say, things aren't just going to go back to normal. Nobody cares about normal anymore. That was not normal for us.
Well, I can say the people that I've come in contact with, especially the ones that are on the ground, maybe the ones that are, excuse me, more so at the square. You know, I don't think they have a vision, you know, just from conversations that I've had with some of the young people down there, they don't see a bigger vision outside of that. And then some people that I know that are, you know, in different spaces within organizations, the mayor just kind of like stepped out, just, you know, just got their self on the porch. I think they're more educated and open-minded to learning about what's really going on and staying educated by these two, you know, young individuals that, you know, constantly, you know, put something on our brain to think about. You know, things that, you know, constantly we at work every day, we do our daily routine, and we don't, you know what I'm saying, sometimes expand our minds to think outside that box because we get so caught up in just the routine of what's going on. But I think right now everybody is aware of what's going on. So I think some people are just willing and ready to get engaged and find out that information. And then, you know, of course we have to do our part with the young people to just get them there. But they don't see it. They don't see the bigger picture. They're living their reality. They're living in it now.
Trinidad, I have a question for you, but before I move on to Trinidad, if anybody in the audience has a question and would like to write it down, then we have one of our ushers, I believe we have a hand over here. After I ask Trinidad this very short question, we'll take one last question from the audience. I think Takia is coming right up to you to get your question, and she'll bring that on stage. Trinidad, you know, we always come to this time in the election cycle and the energy is all around go out and vote, vote, vote. And we've heard panelists that have come up here and have talked about, you know, well, we need to start thinking beyond just get out and vote for what's been presented on the ballot. And, you know, Keturah was talking about reimagining things. What, in your kind of, you know, and again, you know, we know you study this area, soon to be Dr. Trinidad Jackson, but in your perspective, your context, what would you say is a way of reimagining political engagement for the Black community beyond just kind of going out and voting? You know, what's the total package in that? Is it kind of putting up elected officials and then strategically voting for who's already been put up? How does that cycle, do you think, would work for you?
So I think that involves, you know, engaging everybody's perspective. Last year, actually, in October, myself, Savvy, Keturah, Elijah, Brittany Walker, Chantrice Martin, a number of people who are extremely visible right now in these spaces, Alicia Hurl, Charles Booker, we all facilitated a books and breakfast around voter engagement, you know, and at that point it was like, damn, it's too late, but we still need to do it. But this needs to be the jumping off point of what comes, you know, thereafter. And right, we're getting a little better, but I think we need to institute it within ourselves as culture, right? So it needs to become Black culture. Because if we're not, again, understanding how politics are tied to our lived existence, our lived experiences, we'll always be, you know, at the 9th hour saying, who do we vote for? What does the ballot look like? What do I need to do? And something else that's extremely critical, I actually make it a talking point of mine, and it's related to Representative Attica Scott, is that she mentions how she is, or, you know, for her past 2 terms, has been the only Black woman legislator within that space, and now we have 2. The other thing that I like to echo is, for herself, as well as any other person of color, no bill has been heard, right? So we can organize and say, this is who we want to represent us in this political space. And for those of us who are minimally engaged, when we still, you know, observe and experience a community that we don't want, that we don't like, that we want to construct better for, and then we turn around and say, well, what the hell is the politician doing? We sent them, you know, we elected them, they're up there, things aren't getting done. When we realize that white supremacy is literally muzzling her ability, Charles' ability, everybody else's ability to facilitate a Black political agenda, then that increases our level of critical consciousness around just how deep white power is. So we also need to be very critically and crystal clear about when we engage in voting. We also have more work to do about creating a dominant narrative that actually helps us understand what goes on in those chambers so that we can activate against and for that as well.
Wow. This question is a little bit in line with that in terms of, you know, what legislation can be done, what policies can be put in places for you, Keturah. It comes from the audience. And the question is there going to be, or has there already been, any petitions, you know, legislations, anything put in place to do 3 things is what they're concerned about. One is police held in custody during investigations like civilians, murder charges, mental evaluations for police officers for 6 to 12 months following any incidents, and drug testing every 6 months. Have you heard of any such legislation? And could you share that if you have, or anybody even thinking about it, maybe more so what Trinidad said, from the grassroots element to work its way up into the system?
Yes, thank you for that question. That's a great question. Part of what Representative Scott has proposed in Breonna's law does have a piece of alcohol and drug testing. However, it's related to when there's an officer-involved shooting. I do think that those policy recommendations you just put was great, and so I'm going to take that note and make sure that we can funnel that in. And I think that's one of the things too, is that when community has ideas, that's all policy is an idea, and it's figuring out how to put it into play. But those other things, I have not seen those specifically being proposed at this moment, at this point, but I definitely think that's some things that we can do. And the other policy or the piece of legislation that I forgot to touch on that I think the young folks brought up is that this past session before COVID-19 hit, we worked on a change in the Section 145 of the Constitution to make sure that when folks do their time who have past felony convictions, that they get their rights back. And so we actually were able to get the best version of that bill. The only exclusions that we had was if there was any type of voter fraud. And then also in that bill, it said that after 5 years of being served, that folks would get their civil rights back, meaning they would be able to run for elected office. And so I have talked to several legislators, and so we're hoping to get that bill filed the way we left it for 2021. And so, you know, that is something that as we're talking about voting, that something that we have left out of the conversation heavily is the folks who got their rights restored and just that engagement. And so I also encourage folks here, especially our church folks, to make sure that we are engaging the folks who recently got their rights restored and keeping that population in mind, because that is a large number of our community. And those are the people who are most impacted, and so those are the people who are going to have the best solutions to a lot of the issues that we're seeing.
And I know even in terms of that issue with voter registration, there was an issue where people should have had their rights restored, but they would go and check in the system and find out that they did not have their rights restored. And so I think that was something that people were, especially as we're registering people, making sure that the appropriate links were given out and helping people check their status, because unfortunately there were many cases where people were supposed to have their rights restored, but it was maybe something wrong in the name or something like that, and they'd have to go and take extra steps to do it, which is really unjust and unfair. And I think what you raised is a really critical point. Well, we are out of time for this panel. Thank you guys so much. We've learned so much, and I'll share this with you because I know you're going to put it to good use. Wonderful. So as we are bringing up our final panel, which is from the pulpit to the polls, we have one final video from Kelly Cunningham from the NAACP, and she's going to be talking about where to vote. And I hope that you enjoy it as we get prepared for our next panel.
Hey, it's Kelly. I'm back, and I'm telling you where to vote in Jefferson County. Now, because of the pandemic, we're not going to our home location, which is probably the school or the church around the corner. So we all have super centers that we go and we vote. Anybody in the county, any resident can go to any of these super centers. Now, early voting began October the 13th. So early voting is at the fairgrounds, the Yum Center, the Kentucky African American Heritage Center, and Louisville Marriott East. Those are the 4 early voting locations. The times, 8:30 to 4:30, Monday through Saturday. So for 3 weeks, we're early voting. Then on election day, we have expanded voting. So you'll have, in addition to the early voting places, there's other locations giving us a total of 20 places to vote. Election day voting hours are going to be 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. as normal. Now, by state law, you know you got to be in line at 6 o'clock p.m. in order to vote. We want everybody to vote early. Don't wait till the last day unless you absolutely have to. So let me tell you where to go on election day for the expanded voting. We have added Ballard High School, Carter Duval Elementary School, Crosby Middle School, Fairdale High School, Fern Creek High School, Iroquois High School, Jeffersontown High School, Mazik Middle School, Seneca High School, Shawnee High School, Southern High School, St. Matthew's Community Center, Thomas Jefferson Middle School, Valley High School, Wagner High School, and Western High School, in addition to the 4 early voting locations. Election day, 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. Early voting begins October the 13th, 8:30 to 4:30 p.m. Monday through Saturday. This is a very important election, so make sure you plan to vote. Because if you don't plan, you're going to fail, and you're going to fool around and not do it. This is too important not to have a plan.
Y'all let them know.
There we go. Whoop. And so we also know that there are issues in terms of people seeing elected officials as sort of demigods, but then as well, there's a lot of just confusion about, you know, if I'm a Christian, I'm a believer, who really should I be voting for? What issues should I be putting highest on my list? I know I can't get everything because there's no pastor running for office, but you know, what should I be weighing and not weighing in terms of consideration? So I'm happy to be here with my panelists. We have Reverend Corey Shaw, I should use your government name, Daniel Corey Shaw. We have Stachel Bussey, who is here with us. We have Reverend Dr. Ferguson, who is here with us from University of Louisville, and of course, Reverend Timothy E. Finley, Jr. I am going to launch right into this panel, and I'm going to start with Reverend Timothy E. Finley, Jr., and I'm going to ask you a question concerning some of the confusion that is out there about what is the biblical vote, sort of say. I know with Trump, although it's odd enough, Trump seemed to have no religion until he had every religion. But you know, there's a lot of confusion about what is biblical, what is Christian founded, what is not. And so can you answer that a little bit, you know, give some context to that?
Yeah, well, I'll say the vote for Trump is not Christian first. I think when it comes to the way that I view this, and we sort of talked about this last night, we all exist, and Aubrey Hendricks says this, with like a macro ethic, where a larger, you know, like honesty, things of that nature. And within the Christian world, a lot of times we don't understand that a part of our macro ethic has to be justice. And the reason why we don't have that macro ethic is because a lot of what we say, what we do, even in the black church, has been given to us from the white church. And because in the white church, justice is not even on their priority list, because we read white commentators, we read white books, we sing white songs that do not focus on justice. And when I look at scripture, Jesus talked about defending poor people, the disenfranchised, more than anything else. And all through scripture, we see that justice has to be a principal thing. And I think when you consider what Christianity is supposed to be, then there is no way that I can look at voting as something separate. And not just separate, but even as King said, the church is to exist not as the tool of the state, but as the consciousness of the state. So our role is not to be on the fringe. Our role is to be speaking truth to power. It's holding politicians accountable. It's to do as Jesus did, and that is collide with politicians, religious leaders. And I'll say that it was the collusion of religious leaders and politicians that led him to the cross.
Reverend Dr. Ferguson, picking up on that, you know, in terms of our role as Christians in the Presbyterian Church, are you seeing any sort of divide or maybe confusion about, you know, perhaps voting is of the world and we should just kind of focus on the kingdom of God, and there's some huge divide between the world and the kingdom of God? Are you seeing any people that are electing maybe not religious beliefs, and maybe some confusion around that?
All right. I am United Church of Christ and not Presbyterian, but the doctrine is pretty much the same. There is no confusion regarding the justice issue. The confusion is whether you want to apply white justice or black justice. That's the confusion. Yes, we know the scriptures. We understand that Jesus was about the disinherited, those who were oppressed. However, you have many who in Protestant denominations who are not able to reconcile themselves with their privilege, but also their heritage.
Reverend Corey Scholl, you have actually gotten engaged in politics from an actual formal position. Can you talk about that, you know, kind of extending the pulpit beyond just the pulpit and really extending the pulpit into the community, into political office, your experience there, not only your personal experience, but also the experience of your congregation and reception to that?
Yeah, so I ran for public office simply because I felt that it was an extension of my ministry as a local church pastor. Many of the kids who were in that district attended my congregation. Many of the teachers who serve in that district are members of the congregation, and quite honestly, we were at an inflex point here in our city as it related to charter schools, and also as it related to the implementation of some policies that I felt were critical to the flourishing of all students in this community, but black students in particular. And so we kind of had a battle. I would not
I want to ask a follow-on question to that as it relates to the ballot. Of course, we heard about what's being voted on in terms of the tax. Can you give your thoughts on that? Obviously, we guess what your thought would be,
so
but.
it's real clear. Here it is. Say yes to JC.
Extra a year poured into public education. Public education here in Louisville is almost 60% black. 60% black kids almost are in the Jefferson County public system. But black kids express the lowest rates of feelings of belonging. Whereas white students are achieving at about 60% in reading and mathematics, black kids are achieving at 30%. And so what we're trying to do through this tax measure is to earmark funds for racial equity, to make sure that black kids are given the same opportunities as kids who live in. But not only race, it is also to rebuild. So most of our schools in this city are what we officially call nearing end of life. It means they jacked up from the floor up, all right? It means that they are almost at the place where either you're gonna have to do some major renovations or you're gonna have to tear them down. In order to build the schools that we need in this community, we gotta have some money. So this tax will enable us to build new schools and to renovate old schools. Most of our schools in this district are somewhere around 50 years old. And then it will allow us to earmark more funds toward technology, to resource classrooms, to ensure that every teacher has every single thing that they need in order to shape young minds. And so I could talk all day about this tax. But say yes to JCPS because we need to be guilty of investing in public education here in Louisville.
And we know that education really structures a lot of things in the community. Stachel, you've been trying to, and been doing a really great job of it as well, address a lot of community needs, not only stemming from education, as well as hunger. You've been being very politically active in the Breonna Taylor injustice that we've seen here in Louisville. Can you talk to us about the Hope Bus, and also about how ministry is you've kind of almost done a concerted effort to get ministry out into the streets, literally on wheels.
Hey, y'all didn't put the Hope Bus question on my thing. No, really, the Hope Bus is simply just to do what he's talking about. Over 70% of the West End residents are either living at the poverty level or below the poverty level. I'm a West Indian, right? I went from project to project. What I realized, I was mad at the church for a long time. But what I realized is that even now, regardless of Trump, Biden, whoever, the most influential person in the black community is the black preacher. And so with the Hope Bus, what I am literally doing is creating a big old outreach ministry and addressing the needs of our communities. I've been a part of both of the black high schools in the West End, right? Our high schools got police officers. White schools got counselors, right? And so I've been a part of, literally, of this fight for a long time, and I just kind of took it and kind of see, okay, what can I do with it? And what am I actually trying to do? Well, if you watch a movie called Just Mercy, it said the opposite of justice is hopelessness, right? And even I remember watching people in Ferguson on TV, right? And I know that some of our people here, like Nicole A., were in Ferguson, and the guy said, you're not looking at a group of people who are thugs or criminals, you're looking at hopelessness. And so with the Hope Bus, what I am literally trying to do is take some of those aspects that literally have oppressed us at every level and build the black community, the West End particularly, back up. And so that's really it. I mean, I know who the most influential person. If the pastor say vote, guess what's going to happen? People at church going to go vote. If the pastor say go to school, the people are going to say go to school. And for a while, I didn't feel like enough of our churches were talking about or dealing with the issues that were really plaguing the black community, like mental health. I'm so glad it's a thing now. But we've been depressed for a long time. We've been dealing with grief for a long time. And so with the Hope Bus, my job is literally to just to spread hope using those things that have usually been used to put their foot on our necks, really.
And I love how you said that how influential the pastor is, not only in the church, but in the streets. And Pastor Finley, I know that you have been very active out in the streets. How has that been received, both in the church and outside of the church, and by people that may not even be part of your own congregation, but would deem themselves churched?
You know, I'll say this, and I was talking to my mother earlier about this very topic. I've been received, well in the street. I grew up in the Newburgh community. I was born and raised in this city and have a lot of connections. I've gotten more pushback from church folk. And the pushback has been, why are you there? Why are you leading this? And in a lot of ways, I think it's not a new thing. But, just like with Stachel, I feel that that's ministry. That's where I'm supposed to be. And it's not so much going down and just preaching to someone and beating them over the head with the Bible. A lot of ministry is just being present, being available, and meeting what need is present in that moment. So, and I think when it comes to those of us who identify as church folk, again, it goes back to what is your ethic? What is this that we engage in? Is your God these four walls? Do you think that's what's most important? Or do you realize that when it comes down to it, my actions and where I stand and who I stand with and what that ethic is really what's most important and what God is looking at. And that's what drives and pushes me.
Wow. And for you, Reverend Dr. Ferguson, you have been really influential and really impactful in terms of economic empowerment from a biblical context and really getting out into the streets. And I know oftentimes we hear either the prosperity gospel or we hear the poverty gospel, but you're really talking about the empowerment, economic empowerment gospel. Can you talk about your work in that area?
Yeah, I think that for us to have black wealth, that gives us a seat at the table. And that's what we need. That's where we gain influence and power. At Molo Village, we recognize that we are part of a community that the average income is around $16,000 a year. That was before Beecher Terrace was demolished. We recognize that there were children that were at the 30% level as far as achievement. We recognized that we were a part of a food desert. We recognized that out of all of the manufacturing, all of the companies in Russell, only about 100 positions were filled by Russell residents. Everybody else was coming from the outside in. We realized that about $85 million was leaving the Russell community each and every year because people still had to get their needs met. And so in order to be able to make a difference, we have developed a new office building retail center in Russell, the first new building in over 20 years. What the problem is that we have the Russell community, the West End, it has been bled of its resources, and resources have not been replaced or added to. And so as a result of that, we suffer with a loss of wealth, a loss of income, a loss of power. And so the key, I believe, is for us to begin to bring black businesses, black incubators, all of those things that are going to bring wealth back into our community. When we do that, then we will be able to have the tax base that we need to increase to improve our school system. We'll have the resources that we need in order to just build within our community. We'll be able to collaborate with each other and to help to build wealth in the West End. But it begins with recognizing what you need to do in order to have a seat at the table.
You're talking about us building wealth within our community, and I know that in certain churches, and we certainly see this somewhat in the evangelical church, there's this concept that you were talking about it, Pastor Finley, even the other night, that it is more pleasing to give handouts than to help people empower themselves to build it. Do you want to talk more about the evangelical church, Pastor Finley, in terms of the viewpoints? And we have QAnon going on out here, which is not only, I'm learning myself about it, which is not only a conspiracy theory involving Trump kind of being this sort of biblical, Leviathan type figure, but also they have created a QAnon Bible, which is parts of the Bible and parts of conspiracy theory and mix it in. But even outside of QAnon, we know that the evangelical movement has really been strong in terms of pro-Trump. And so do you have any thoughts about that? I mean, is there a divide in that movement? Do they represent the entirety of Christianity, although the media kind of puts them out there as representatives? Would you agree with that concept?
No, I don't think they represent Christianity at all. I think that even before Donald Trump, the evangelical church was problematic in what they stand for, what they preach. I think it goes back to what Dr. Ferguson has mentioned as well, that they embrace a sterilized, whitewashed idea of justice, which is really no justice at all. I think about the words of Jesus when he was questioned by the Pharisees, and they asked him, what's the most important commandment? And he said, love the Lord your God with your mind, body, soul. The second is unto the first, love your neighbor as yourself. The challenge that I have, and I speak out and I say things, and I know that they can be difficult to swallow for some people, but if we look at Scripture and what it means to be a follower of Christ, then I have an issue because I don't believe that the evangelical church as presently constructed is following Christ. And I believe that they operate more akin to the FOP with the police, that the evangelical church is like the Fraternal Order of Police to politics in this nation. And I believe that the only way, similar to the police department, the only way that there can be reconciliation is it has to be dismantled, reimagined, rethought, because currently it's an issue, and it's not spoken out of a place of hate, but it's truth. We have evangelical churches in this city where the pastor has gotten up and said things like a vote for Trump is a vote for God. In my eyes, that's sacrilegious, it's dangerous, it's foolish, and the thing that we have to do, the same thing that Jesus did when he referred to the Pharisees as a brood of vipers, the same thing that the Apostle Paul did when he said, you foolish Galatians, who has bewitched you? It has to be called out. It cannot be you over there, we over here, you do, because we are filling those spaces up. We talked about it in the previous panel. And anybody that knows me know I have an issue with the whole multicultural church idea, because I don't think we're seeing multicultural churches. We are seeing multiracial churches, but it's not multicultural because there's one dominant culture and every other culture has to assimilate to that particular culture. At Southeast, they're not singing gospel music. They're not celebrating gospel heritage, black heritage. There's a dominant culture there. And I believe that white silence, complicity is dangerous. And I think that if you're on the side of right, you have to speak out and then do more than just speak out. You have to align with what's right. And we're not seeing that right now. And planning businesses and organizations in black neighborhoods is not aligning with what's right. It's a form of gentrification. So.
Pastor Scholl, do you want to talk a little bit about that too as well? I saw you nodding your head a lot.
Well,
that white evangelicals have never been Christian. White evangelicals have created a religion that upholds white supremacy. It is an institution that gives theological cover for the racism, the militarism, the colonialism of America. White evangelicals have never been Christian. Now, I believe they can be saved. But we need to remember that the first exorcism that happened in Mark's gospel was not at a bar. It wasn't at a strip club, but it was at church. And my hope, my prayer is that one day the wind, I'm in a Pentecostal church, right? So I can talk like this. But I hope that one day the wind of the Holy Spirit would just blow through some of these places. Yeah, the Ruah. I wish there was a Pentecostal experience that some of these evangelicals would encounter, because until then, they can never be Christian. So I have to check my offense at them, because I understand that they do not now, nor have they ever served the Jesus that I serve. And so I have to remind myself that what I'm seeing is really hardened hearts and 21st century Pharisaicalism. And so what I think we need to understand as we begin to ponder the reality of the evangelical movement in America and how they currently function is that they're going to be who they are, and we pray for their salvation. But what's wrong with some of us who gravitate to these expressions of American evangelicalism that is sometimes in blackface? So we leave our churches because we don't want to hear about politics. The preacher is too political. And then we take our money and we take our support to some of these white evangelical churches, and then we're confused when they have nothing to say about Breonna Taylor. And so, so what is the cause for some of our moral confusion, where we're able to embrace the reality of personal sin, but not systemic sin? The New Testament talks about thrones, principalities, and powers. That's pre-modern language for institutions, corporations, and nation states. And so I think I think some of us are complicit in sort of the legitimizing of American evangelicalism because we listen to the sermons, we buy the books, we go to the churches, and we do it without any type of thought being given to the damage, the very real damage that's being done to our communities.
Pastor Finley, and then I have a question for you as well, Stachel. What Pastor Scholl was talking about really harkens to the issue of a lot of people, this kind of confusion, right? This moral confusion. A lot of times people only look at two issues, main issues, abortion and looking at homosexuality, and they just vote on as a Christian, I should just vote on something like that. Are those the only two issues? I mean, and we're talking about there's more to it than that. Can you shed some more light on that?
I think that, as simple as I can put it, it's a cherry picking. And I also say this, that we may need to go back and re-examine what we think we know about certain things. Because I think that there are some things that we have just taken without having any sort of real study and understanding of what the Bible is talking about in context. But even with that being said, there's a cherry picking. And I have an issue, even when you talk about pro-life, and I saw my brother talk about this a little earlier, it's not so much that they're even pro-life, they're anti-choice. And when you are constantly trying to manipulate and take control of a woman's body, that's patriarchy in a way that has been weaponized and then put, religion to cover that up. So again, I try not to even go down that road when I'm conversing with an evangelical, because it just, again, they're so dead set on two flagship things, but yet they won't talk about Black Lives Mattering. They won't talk about economic injustice. They won't talk about any of these things because, again, that's not something that interests them.
Stachel, you've been really active on the political activism side of, social justice activism side of the scope. I know that at one point you're definitely feeling called to the pulpit, and you have really extended that out into the streets as well, kind of creating your own new ministry that really has not been heard of or seen or done before, and then at the same time pushing so hard for social justice issues. Can you talk about how you're managing all of that, and also in the context of the current administration as you're trying to navigate that and really make impact?
One thing that I think both of my brothers failed to mention, and probably not on purpose, is that we got a lot of Black evangelicals perpetuating the narrative. We got a lot of Black pastors with white pockets with white hands in their pockets. We got a lot of Black pastors who praise their buildings and don't give a crap. See, I fixed it. crap about their people, right? We have a lot of, and that's not like, I don't want you guys to hear that as me bashing like the black church, because the black church is not a monolith. And you got two brothers here who are doing the work, but it takes more than three of us to really be concerned about what is happening to our community. And there is no disconnect, and I'm kind of like Corey, like there is no disconnect. Like if you serve Jesus, then you have an obligation to justice. I am on these streets because that's my Christian conviction. I am on these streets because I believe if Jesus Christ was here, he would have his little Jesus sandals on, right, getting tear gas with us. I believe Jesus would be out here fighting like we fight, and Jesus would probably look like Tim in handcuffs. I don't know. I'm just saying, right? Like, I believe Jesus would be out here because Jesus simply said, I didn't come to abolish the law. I came to uphold it. I came to hold the law, and I came to hold accountable, and I came to hold people accountable to what they said they were going to be. So there is no separation from Jesus and justice. Matter of fact, I think when Jesus protested, that's what got him killed. He was good until he went in the temple and turned over the money table. But see, that's what happens. He was good when he was cool, he was silent. He like, no, don't tell nobody, I healed your eyes, fam. But when Jesus kind of went to the temple, to the church, and said, hold on, you evangelicals. Y'all selling a false God. Y'all selling something. Y'all done made my father's house a den of thieves. And what did he mean? It didn't mean he was stealing. What it means was that they was paying more for food than what they should have been. They were charging convenience store prices in the church. How did Jesus deal with women? We still got to fight in the black church for women to preach. What did Jesus do with the marginalized? He restored them to society. There is no separation from Jesus and justice. If you got a Christianity that doesn't allow you to say Black Lives Matter, I'm like Tim, and you got to go back to the book. It's a heart issue. This is a humanity fight. I'm so sorry.
I want to get Reverend Dr. Ferguson's viewpoint because you are a black woman pastor, all right? Can you talk about that experience, right, that context? I mean, what Stachel's getting at is this kind of divide and this dynamic, especially in light of what's going on politically, and, you know, we have a president of the United States that's grabbing people by, you know, areas that shouldn't be grabbed by and proud about it. And then you have religious leaders that are supporting a candidate that is doing that. What does that say to black or female pastors in general, but certainly black women who are head pastors over churches?
That's a touchy subject. It's a touchy. Even though I have been a pastor for a while and know I was called by Jesus to pastor, I have not always had the support of my brethren, and primarily in our African American churches. And it's as though they have bought into the evangelical mindset in many regards. Patriarchy still exists, big time. Misogyny still exists, big time. And so, yes, it's very difficult. And so when you have a president that talks that same language, when you have senators and other politicians that talk that same language, it makes it very difficult to maneuver. But that's why I keep going back to saying that you need to align yourself with people, like-minded people who are going to help you to achieve the things that need to be done in order to improve our community. You know, it's strategic. They're strategic against us, and we have to be strategic as well in how we function in order to be able to achieve. We don't do that very well. We are brought up to conquer each other, not to collaborate with each other, not to support one another. That's a divisive technique that is used in the black community, and it's used very well. But when we learn how to come together based on the gospel of Jesus Christ, when we come together to support one another and encourage one another, isn't that what the gospel tells us, to encourage your brothers and sisters? When we start learning how to do that, then we'll have a better chance of achieving what we need to do, not only within our communities, but politically as well.
And I think that, you know, everybody we have on this panel, of course, has that same mission, that same goal. And one of the things that I've actually enjoyed, you know, as hard as it has been to see all this injustice going on, is the community, the coming together of the church with those that may not even be regular attenders of church, with pastors coming together, male, female, across different churches, all standing on the front line together, protesting, now pushing, you know, political issues that are for our community. And so I really have enjoyed talking to you guys. We're going to wrap out this entire symposium with a special message from Reverend Timothy E. Finley Jr., but I would like to just encourage you guys all to keep moving forward in the efforts. And again, thank you for being on the panel with us.
Awesome. Well, we're going to wrap up, as Dr. Angelique said, but first I want to make sure I do this. I'm going to ask if everyone who helped put this together from the LDC staff, if you will come really quickly, all those, Marcus, Chantel, Samantha, Monica, I want you all, Jelani, y'all come on up, come on up. I want you all to see Dr. Angelique, who really headed up tonight, put all of this together for Life Development Corporation. The whole purpose tonight was to bring education in a way that spoke to what our issues are. And we wanted to make sure we brought up those who are in the political field, the clergy. We wanted to bring up youth voices, because we want to really spread this message that voting is extremely important and that we do have the power to change things. So again, we thank you. This is not the end. We're going to have a night of inspiration tomorrow in my old neighborhood, Petersburg/Newburgh Park. We'll have that going on. And then on Saturday, something that myself and Stachel is a part of, the Justice and Freedom Coalition, we're going to have an interest meeting, and then we're going to connect with Nicole Hayden and the Louisville Urban League and Charlize, and we're going to have a voter caravan and rally, and we're going to start in Newburgh, and then we're going to end at the fairgrounds, and I'll be voting there on Saturday. So again, we want to thank you. Thank you, Dr. Angelique, for a fantastic, fantastic night. And to all of our panelists, we thank God for you. So we pray God's blessing on you, and hopefully you can join us Friday night, tomorrow night, in Newburgh Park. We'll have a wonderful time. So God bless you all, and we'll see you tomorrow. God bless you.